So I'm going to follow up on some of the baseline findings that we have within the LEEF cohort to give you an illustration of what things have looked like only in the baseline data. We're still in the middle of analyses of a lot of the intervention effects. So this is looking at working conditions, work-family balance, and health in the long-term care setting. To fill you in a little bit, so the nursing home company that we worked with was a very, very large national company. It was a for-profit nursing home. We actually worked in the New England group of this. Nursing homes are highly regulated, as a matter of fact, maybe among the most highly regulated of almost any industries that you can think of. The associated regulations related to Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, as well as legal issues regarding the health of residents and patients, makes this a very, very highly structured work environment. The workforce was very different than in Tomo. It was low and middle income, largely hourly workforce, and predominantly female, which made it very interesting from our perspective to be looking at a largely female workforce. We looked at work sites in geographically distinct areas across 6 states in New England. There were 30 physical locations, that is nursing facilities, nursing home facilities, that we looked at. There were about 50 who were eligible, and in fact, as we started to design the study, we wanted to only look at nursing homes that could be matched, so we could randomly allocate geographically proximate areas that were of a certain size and actually had a certain stability, so that if the company that we were working with had just recently acquired a nursing home and didn't have managed leadership that they thought was stable, we didn't include those nursing homes in our randomization. But having said that, among the 30, they were randomized completely. As Erin said, we customized the intervention, and one of the added guiding principles for change, one of the things that the nursing home company came up with, that LEEF came up with, is that they were very open to doing anything as long as it was safe, legal, and cost neutral. Those were the ground rules. That turns out to be a lot of guiding principles, though. They wanted to have it reflect work that's happening at every site every day. One of the goals of the intervention was to have people feel just better about where they were on a normal work day. So one of the common phrases was, every day should feel like Saturday, or what does it feel like on days off, and how could we make that more possible to feel more of that on days that you were work. And that there was a lot of focus on handling schedule conflicts, call-outs. People could be called out to do different kinds of work at different times, and to be able to shift and do trades in a fair and transparent way. So one of the things that we encouraged in the intervention is that if people felt like they couldn't be at work at a certain time, they could actually arrange a shift in schedules with a partner. That one of the things that we wanted people not to feel like was that people were just walking off the job, or that some people were slacking, but that in fact there had to be a way to manage the ground rules for the nursing home, which is that everybody needs to be there. There are a lot of minimum requirements for nursing facilities, and so we wanted to do that in a fair and transparent way. And that there was a unit or a committee that often pursued change once it was identified in sessions. As Erin said, one of the things about nursing homes is that we could not actually mobilize all the employees together in many, many, many sessions, so we needed a more structured way to think about influencing change. Here are some of the barriers that we faced in this healthcare industry. Attendance and staffing patterns change a lot, and it could be very difficult getting people off the floor. So if there was any kind of healthcare crisis, patient safety obviously comes first. People had to be on the floor working. As I said before, this is a highly regulated environment, so things are structured in a way that you can't have just flexible hours. There are regulations about how many hours you can work at a shift, how many you can do back-to-back. Some of these are state regulated, some of them are federally regulated, but in any case, they were highly regulated. And that often supervisors felt very overworked. Supervisors were doing a lot of work and sometimes felt very challenged by the intervention. So there was more tension probably between managers and employees in the nursing home facility than there might have been in Tomo. So I want to just show you some of the baseline results to give you an idea of the kinds of measures that we use, the kinds of outcomes, and what our preliminary findings look like. So this is our baseline paper looking at work-family conflict and cardiometabolic risk and sleep duration in this nursing home setting. And this is a paper that actually should be out next week in JOHP. So the study aims were actually to describe, this is one of the first papers describing the baseline findings from the sample characteristics, describe the LEEF cohort. We wanted to look at variation in work and demographic characteristics in the nursing homes, and we wanted also to identify the association between work-family characteristics and cardiometabolic risk and sleep duration in a multi-level analysis, which was the first of a primary aim in terms of health outcomes. We had a few hypotheses. One of them was that higher reported work-to-family conflict and family-to-work conflict would be associated with greater cardiometabolic risk and shorter sleep duration. And we also had a hypothesis that having children under 18 years of age at home and working more hours would be associated with greater cardiometabolic risk and shorter sleep duration. You'll see what happens. So the outcome of our CRS score was a very complex summary score that was developed by a team of us and led by Miguel Marino, and that the published data on the development of that score is published in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine. It looks like a modified Framingham risk score in which we focused predominantly on factors that we thought were modifiable because some of the risk score measures in Framingham are not modifiable. We didn't think we would affect age, for instance, although age is actually in the model. So here are the factors that are in the model in terms of this CRS score. We use self-report measures of age, gender, and current smoking status. And we looked at measured body mass index, systolic blood pressure, and then we looked at data from our dried blood spots. We had glycosylated hemoglobin, total cholesterol, and high density and low density cholesterol. Our second outcome was related to sleep duration. As I showed you earlier, what the wrist actigraphy looked like, it was 1 week of wrist actigraphy. It captures single-axis wrist movements and light levels in 30-second epochs, and via induction, it's an on-the-wrist indicator of compliance, so it actually is quite sensitive to movement. Many of the pedometers that are used now for also sleep are not nearly as sensitive as our actigraphy measure, which actually could get these 30-second epochs of very slight movements. The only thing that mimics sleep, we've been told, is if you're very still watching television, it sometimes looks like you're asleep, and you could not move at all. We looked at average daily 24-hour sleep duration, and it was scored using a standard algorithm that actually the reference is for here as well. Oops. So this is the sample. Again, we had 30 study groups, 30 nursing facilities, and nursing facilities were the unit of randomization for the intervention, so there were 15 and 15, which you see in the intervention and control group. And then you can see that there were employees who were eligible in both sites and managers who were eligible, so that's each of these figures there. And then we have data on the employee CAPI interview, which is from the survey data, and it shows you the number of people there. And then we go all the way through to see the number of people who complied with DBS collection and actigraphy. And you'll note that for the DBS particularly, there was extraordinarily high compliance. It was about 90% response rate. So once people did the survey, odds were very, very high that they would do the DBS. The actigraphy is slightly lower, but still really quite excellent. So for instance, if you look at just the intervention group, 725 people did the CAPI interview, and 652 people did the actigraphy. So pretty good compliance in terms of doing that. And these are the baseline data. Here are the sociodemographic characteristics. You'll see quite different from TOMO. One of the things to recall is that there were about 1,500 people in the cohort. The vast majority of people are women. So 1,406 of the cohort were women and only 118 men, which actually limits the ability of us to look at a lot of gender differences that we thought we might be able to look at. So when we're talking about mean effects, we're usually talking about what happens in women in this sample. 64% of the women were married, 53% of the men. This is a very diverse sample, so there are many people who are foreign-born, 36% of women foreign-born, 76% of men. And about half the women in the cohort had children under the age of 18 living in the household, and just under a third of men had children under 18. And the mean hours of the work week was about 40 for women, 44 for men. So people worked a fair amount, and sometimes they had second jobs, so that one of the things we're exploring is actually total work hours across, although this is the total work hours for here. Now, if we look at the overall findings, some interesting things happen in the cohort. So if you just look at the first column for the cardiometabolic risk score, you'll see that work-to-family conflict was significantly associated with cardiometabolic risk score, and family-to-work conflict was not associated with the CRS score. Having children under 18 versus over 18 was, and total work hours was not significant for CRS. But we have very different findings for sleep. So one of the lessons that we have from this is that actually there may well be very specific differences that we see with different kinds of health outcomes. So in this case, the striking thing is that family-to-work conflict is associated with sleep duration. That is, people had shorter amounts of sleep when they had high levels of family-to-work conflict. So having family-to-work conflict, you could imagine in some way influences the duration of sleep because something is going on in your household, whereas work-to-family conflict for the sleep was actually associated with longer duration. Something that we did not hypothesize, and we suspect, if it's replicated in other studies, may actually have to do with this kind of multiple role enhancement, that even though people felt they had conflict, in fact, they were benefiting by having these kind of multiple roles. And total work hours was very strongly associated with sleep, and not nearly so strongly associated with cardiometabolic risk. And I'll just show you one of these findings. So this is the finding for total work hours and sleep duration. And what you can see is an enormously important outcome with association with sleep duration, decreasing with total work hours on the job for this. So those are the lines and the confidence intervals around that, and you can see it's very, very strongly associated with the more you work, the less time you sleep. So we really look forward to replicating these and to looking at the effects of the intervention, and we will turn this over now to Kelly Davis.